Like the Underwater Menace from earlier in 1967, the Macra Terror soundtrack was realized on an electric organ. Although I haven't found documentation to confirm this, it's quite likely that Simpson is the performer, as he was on the Underwater Menace. Unusually, both stories feature diegetic music, that is, music meant to be audible to the characters in the drama, as opposed to incidental music meant for the audience only. Even so, the music of Jamie's escape to danger is purely incidental. As I mentioned in part 1, my original transcription consisted only of the first 10 seconds of this 3-minute arrangement. Why was I so resistant to tackle more Macra music? Funny enough, episodes 43 and 44 helped me answer this. These, as you saw, are transcriptions from season 8, the year Simpson got synthesized. With harmonic timbres and parallel lines similar to that season's music, the Macra Terror now sounds to me like the prototype for season 8's music. This type of sound didn't really grab me at first, but once I got over myself, I learned even a crab like me could love it. Sorry. If you're a longtime viewer and listener of the project, and who isn't, you might understand why the first 10 seconds were, for a time, the most interesting thing to me about this soundtrack. Honestly, no other track is as dramatic in terms of its melodic and harmonic character. First, starting on an upbeat in sextuplet rhythm, a melody with a timbre representing a clarinet shoots up almost 2 octaves, using most of the notes of the A whole tone scale. It resolves from the 7th G down to F sharp, a note foreign to that scale, as the melody holds 3 quartal harmonies, all perfect fourths, descend in half steps. The timbre of the harmonies is quite harsh and full of overtones. My rendering features some of the left-hand notes doubled an octave above, but played much more softly than the left. This is an attempt to create that bright timbre without making those upper notes too important. The melody volleys again similarly and is answered similarly. The ill-fated character Medoc yells a line in the middle of the melody's ascent, so I admit to making an educated guess of 1 or 2 notes here. With the melody resolving to A natural, the quartal chords begin a whole step higher than their first iteration. Finally, a triplet rhythm, half the speed of the sextuplets, outlines a surprise C major triad, resolving to B natural. A final stinging chord alters the lowest note from perfect fourth to tritone, forcing the B natural melody to coexist with C natural and D flat in the harmony. The end. Thanks for watching. Is what I would say if I had been so single-minded as to end my transcription there. At least I did right in the end. With Jamie entering the old shaft, unwillingly leaving Polly behind, the music instantly shifts gears and also tempos, which might suggest it's a separate track pasted on. Shrug. Quietly, an octave E natural sounds and later wavers chromatically before resolving back. Underneath, the bass sounds D flat, perhaps maintaining the low note of the previous chord. Added here are melodic perfect fourths on either side of the bass, which are the majors 3rd and 7th of D flat. These two then join harmonically and seem to rhythmically trigger the melody's wavers. The harmonies almost make the E natural, technically just the minor 3rd, sound even more dissonant, making it seem like the sharp 9th of D flat major rather than a simple D flat or C sharp minor. The next scene with Jamie actually has no music, except for the big chordal sting as we witness the death of Medoc. This chord, often used to represent the Macra, is well represented in the arrangement, and I'll discuss it in a moment. My arrangement recommences at the following scene, where Jamie discovers Medoc's body, and later, a Macra skulking in the shadows. The music of this and the following scenes reprises music heard in episodes 1 and 2 of the story. But these are the most interesting versions to me. That's because Simpson performs them in a much looser style. Tempos are flexible, pushing and pulling somewhere between 58 and 70 beats per minute. Also, although heard earlier in common 4/4 time, some measures add or drop eighth note beats as if the rhythm was improvised. My job was thus more complicated than normal because besides pasting together these chopped up segments of a single track, I had to learn all these rhythmic irregularities. The track opens with a bass structure of root fifth, which is doubled an octave higher. This structure rocks back and forth by half step, C to D flat to start, and will at key points shift up a whole step. An easy way and effective way of increasing musical tension. Throughout these passages, it's fairly easy to hear its jerky, inconstant rhythms. When the right hand is available, I use it to add the highest of this 4-note structure. But if the right hand is too busy or out of range, I must make do with the left hand's 3 notes. Alert listeners will perhaps recognize here a direct relationship to the heaving bass line structure throughout The Keller Machine, episode 20, synth music of season 8. Those listeners of a certain age or a certain cinematic proclivity might also find here a relationship to the shark motif that John Williams uses in his score to the movie Jaws. Written 8 years later, I merely point this out to show that similar dramatic needs can produce similar musical ideas. The primary timbre of melody is made of parallel minor sixths, making it yet another etude for the right hand. Although technically a new interval in the project for this type of writing, we've seen lots of thirds and fourths in the past. This sound is an inversion of the interval of a major third, which formed the timbre of the Axos Arrives melody from episode 43, synth music of season 8. Consonant within itself, its parallelism creates many interesting harmonies above the stable bass line. The melody opens in a bit of a blur. Beginning on E flat, the minor third of C in the bass, the blur begins up a half step to the major third, then lifts in whole steps with 1 half step inserted to B flat, the minor 7th of C. We will see that this type of figure opens each new phrase, signaled by the bass line transposing up just before. Anytime the melody is this fast, I use 2 hands to handle it. This meant leaving out a bass note or 2. Suddenly, the music is interrupted by a loud chordal sting, D flat dominant 7 flat 5. I discussed the idea of stings in episode 49, and the most recent use of this type of harmony was very recently in episode 50. This particular sting is clearly its own separate track and is overlaid at key points in the action, such as here, where Jamie discovers Medoc's body. After the sting chord fades away, the melody continues on B flat, then after a quick lower neighbor and back, it leaps up a perfect fifth. This turns out to be an upper neighbor, which resolves a half step lower. After some repeated E naturals, as always harmonized by the minor 6th below, the line rises up slightly, then from G natural crouches down chromatically to D natural, finishing with a skip to the original B flat. It next rears back up chromatically from A to E. The 2 most important notes of this melody, B flat and E natural, are noticeably a tritone apart. That always spells danger. The following contrasting bit of melody is based on a new organ timbre, which I realize on the piano as parallel perfect fifths in the upper register. As pairs, they swing up and down in octaves or near octaves, while as sets, each of the upper and lower sounds are lifting or dropping by half steps. I like this bit a lot. It sounds like the Macra claws, hungrily flailing and grasping. In finishing this contrasting phrase, it syncs chromatically, echoing that earlier crouching shape. While the final melody note E, harmonized with A, rings on, the sting chord shocks us, leaving us unnerved. On the soundtrack, the sting clears away and the melody emerges still sounding. Sostenuto pedal to the rescue. As long as I grab those two notes before the sting, they should emerge from the piano as well. It is here that the bass line shifts for the first time, in essence continuing its crawl, settling for a time on D and E flat. The melody's perfect fifth resolves upward too, albeit a half step only. And from here, the minor sixth timbre returns, essentially restarting the melody a whole step higher. 2.5 measures in, after the lower and upper neighbor melody, this long scene ends, and when we return to Jamie, the music resumes roughly where it stopped. So I've joined them seamlessly in my arrangement. At once, the melody sets off differently, this time with a set of 3 blurs. The first 2 are not only identical, but also a transposition of the original blur up a whole step, plus an octave. Underneath, I play the bass a little differently here because the upper note, previously played by the right hand where possible, is very prominent. I reflect that by playing the upper 3 notes of the 4-note structure rather than the lower 3. The final blur has a slightly altered shape with an extra half step, which allows it to resolve exactly an octave higher than these blurs started. This mini climax is reinforced by the bass's return to the lowest 3 notes. There follows the flailing, grasping motif in perfect fifths, also transposed from before. Right before it concludes, the bass line crawls up further, now alternating E and F. Just as the melody starts its 3rd iteration, that scene ends with Jamie prodding and awakening a listless Macra. When we return, the music has a slight rewind before any new material is played, but I chose another seamless join without any repeating. In this short scene, Jamie is trying to dodge around the Macra, but it starts becoming more active. We hear the melody restart in this new transposition again until the lower and upper neighbor line. When we return for another short scene, the Macra gaining its strength as Jamie is running out of options, the music has seemingly jumped ahead, for it has already transposed itself up a further whole step, the bass to F sharp and G, and the melody restarting in this new key. To make this a bit more sensible, I added 2 beats of bass vamp on E to give the melody a bit longer to ring, before the bass shifts up for the last time. We get as far, again, as the lower upper neighbor line. In the next scene, where Jamie, to his horror, finds another Macra lurking behind him, there is again some rewind. The new material is another set of 3 blurs. The first one interrupted by the sting chord, before the final climactic blur rises to B flat, over 2 octaves higher than the notes we started with. The bass line continues briefly, fading out at this point, and there is a moment's silence. The next 2 Jamie scenes, where the Macra's vital gas supply begins choking him, are not included in my arrangement. The music essentially starts over from the top of these shaft scenes, but in a steadier rhythm. Besides, the first scene's hissing sound of gas and Jamie's coughing renders the music nearly inaudible. After the musical pause, the climax of the arrangement is the cliffhanger to episode 3, where coughing his heart out while 2 Macra close in. Jamie's escape seems to have cost him his life. Suitably, the music is suddenly faster, driving, and relentless. The bass line in general starts on the higher note D flat, resolving to C. It quickly begins rising, and a new pattern will shortly emerge. The melody, meanwhile, is brand new, realized using the bright timbre of root fifth octave, almost like the bass. Settling for a time on D flat, this opening phrase ends by returning to the upper-lower neighbor shapes. At that point, the bass begins an intensely driving pattern in eighth notes, splitting the octave note from the root fifth, and having already transposed up to E flat and D. Now the melody returns to the minor sixth timbre where it will stay. Beginning on F sharp with a blur of a slightly different shape, the melody next resembles some of the flailing sounds heard earlier, here in a contrasting triplet rhythm. These are bookended by another blur, which resolves to F sharp, again an octave higher from the start. More melodic flails follow, this time swinging as wide as a major seventh, leading to an aggressive rearing up over an octave, landing via a final lower upper neighbor shape onto B flat. As the music reaches its climax, the bass line shifting up a final whole step, the melody sets off in pairs of sounds, like those grasping flails, but in a compact distilled form. The third of these measures subtly alters the pattern, and as we reach the cliffhanger, the melody stops to hold a single sound, which I play tremolo in deference to the steady dynamics of the organ. With all hope lost, a final devastating sting chord brings this week's drama to an end. Yet another story that might put you off seafood. Thanks so much for watching episode 51, part 2 of the Dudley Simpson is Doctor Who project. Thank you, as always, to my wonderful Patreons who make videos like this happen, and they get to see them first. Join, please, at patreon.com/Jess Jurkovic. Tips are also greatly appreciated. Go to coffee.com/Jess Jurkovic to contribute whatever you feel. Subscribe, like, share, and comment on YouTube as well, and I'll see you next time.